to De Anza College for 2 years, graduated in 2018, and then similar to Alexandra, transferred to UC Berkeley and did a degree in molecular and cellular biology. After that, took one gap year as well. And then after that gap year, got accepted to UCSD. And then unlike everyone else, I'm currently figuring out my path, not totally sure exactly what I want to specialize in, but open to everything at this point.
And then my name's Jeff. I'm from San Diego as well. I went to the San Diego community colleges, so around our community here, attending campuses in Miramar, Mesa, and downtown. So all of our campuses are shared. So, and then after that was in 2014, and then 2015, I transferred pretty quickly to UCSD. And then attended there full time for 3 years. And then I took 3 gap years after I graduated in 2018 and applied twice and then got in on my second time to UCSD. And it is amazing and I love it.
Awesome. So we're going to have people start typing their question in the Q&A, but some people submitted questions beforehand. And the first one is, what was the most challenging part of medical school?
Okay, I feel like as a third year, I can speak to this because it's very fresh. So the way med school works, just briefly, is it's 4 years usually. Usually your first 2 years are book studying, and then the remaining 2 years, the third year, you rotate through all the major departments in the hospital. And then in fourth year, you kind of make your decision more or less what you want to apply to. Maybe you have 2 things that are top on the list and you go through and really focus on those 2 areas. And classically, third year is very challenging because you're working with a lot of different personalities, a lot of different people. You always want to look your best because they're evaluating you, and there's a lot of feedback and advice, and it's just very challenging. You're in a completely new environment, and 1 week you're in an OR and you've never been in an OR before, and everyone's telling you don't touch, and then the next week you're in clinic and they're giving you like that you come in and they're like, okay, go see the patient in room 6, and you're like, wait, what? I just showed up, like I don't know what I'm doing here. Where is room 6? So I think a lot of people, especially the fourth years, will probably agree with me. It's definitely a challenge. In terms of like, how would you prepare for it? I think as community college students, we actually have like a big advantage because a lot of us have had like some life experience, not just that in like a bad sense for other people, but I think something med schools are really looking for is seeing that you've had a job of some sort or a lot of volunteer experiences that are different, because you're going to work with a lot of different personalities, and it's really good to be able to just go with the flow and keep a smile on your face even when things are stressful. And just certain professional things like showing up on time is a huge deal in third year. And that seems trivial, but when you're supposed to show up at 4:30 a.m., it's actually a commitment, and it's pretty hard. So I personally think that was probably the hardest part of med school for me.
I'm going to agree that third year and parts of fourth year, for my personality type, I tend to be a little introverted. And so really getting out there and deciding that you're going to commit to being, in this clinical role that's might be a little bit new and uncomfortable. Third year, I felt like was a practice in just getting comfortable being slightly uncomfortable. And when you come out fourth year, you're like, wow, I've made all of this progress and now I'm comfortable being uncomfortable all the time. I think it's easy to underestimate how tiring it is to be constantly under evaluation. So for all of third year, knowing that everybody you come into contact to can pretty much evaluate you it can be sort of like, it's a lot. So for me, I think that was one of the harder parts is just being always on and always positive, always putting your best foot forward, always knowing that everybody is, expecting you to not be great and not know what you're doing, but to at least be positive and there and willing to try and willing to show up and to try to do the hard things. I think that was, to really just second what you said, Alexandra.
Appreciate the validation.
I agree with everything that's been said too, especially the evaluation part. It's just, anyways, I wanted to focus more on the first and second year, and the first years can tell me if they feel the same. The hardest thing for me in the first and second year was keeping my sanity, because it's easy. We talk about keep your hobbies, do this, do that, but then you have a test every other week, or everything is tempting to try to kind of experience. There's free clinic, there's this, that, and you want to do everything. So for me, the hardest thing in the first and second year was to have a good schedule of what I want to do and what I don't want to do, to keep time for myself and keep the balance. And then being super flexible with because we go block to block. So we are studying heart for 3 weeks, and then we go to the kidneys, and then we go to the lungs. And then each block works differently because each block has a different professor that chooses how they want to run the block. So being very flexible, that one method that worked for the previous block may not work for this block, and you should choose another method of studying, was challenging at first for me in the beginning of the first year. And I was looking for a magic solution to use it for every single block for the 2 years. And it took me some time to figure out that there's no magic solution, and I should find something for each block as we started, which is hard because you have to study I don't know how many hours a day to make sure that you are making hitting the goals, but also figuring out your study skills and methods that work. Kind of going back to Alexandra's point, I think being a community college student also helped me in that, because I had some experience in being at semester programs and then quarter programs, and then kind of working with different professors and different types of teaching methods. So yeah, I think.
I will definitely echo that. And I think Jeff and I are definitely taking notes for the third year experience, because it sounds like the toughest part of med school is coming up. But for me, what the most difficult part was I think for the first time in my life, I felt like there was more resources and more information that I knew what to do with. So what I had to kind of understand was pick and choose the resources that work well for you. And just like Katayun mentioned, it's not going to be the same resources every time. Sometimes it's going to be doing flashcards. Sometimes it's going to be doing outlines, or, reading a textbook or something like that. And I found that previously I had a tried and true method. I could do the same thing for every single class, and I had the time to use all the resources that were available. So being comfortable not checking every single box is something that I am still getting comfortable with and still learning how to do that.
Also, I didn't mean to scare everyone. I should also mention that third year is considered the best year when people look back on med school, because it's the year that you got to try everything. You may never go in the OR again, but you did it in third year. So it's also one of the most memorable, and the amount of stories you're going to have after third year is just something else. So I don't want to make it all negative. Third year is also amazing in many ways.
And relationships, you build really strong relationships because you're one-on-one with your classmates sometimes in sort of difficult situations. So,
and I'll keep my part really brief, because I think everyone really talked about it very well. But the hardest part for me is just kind of what mentioned prior was the adaptability. So going from focusing all your efforts on learning everything about the heart, and then the next day you're learning about the lungs, and then the next day you're learning about renal system, and then going from kind of what the third years were saying was going from rotation to rotation. You go you're in an OR, you're not touching anything, to seeing all these patients and they're like immediately interviewing, you're trying to pull out your classes from first year and being like, I don't remember any of my physical exams. And so it's just being able to adapt from this. But I think the biggest thing from community college that taught me was finding where you can find all the resources available for you. Because we do have plenty of resources, but they're all kind of hidden away, and just knowing who to ask and identifying like, who to ask. And then kind of, for me, I was a really annoying community college student because I was literally asking everyone like, what do I do? What do I do? And then eventually, you get really scrappy and you get to figure out everything for yourself. And I think that independent drive is kind of what a lot of medical schools are also looking for. That being able to, be comfortable with not knowing, but knowing how to find the answer for your patients and how to find the answer for your team and stuff like that. So yeah.
The next question that a couple of people asked were, for those of you who applied this a second time and got accepted, what did you do different during your second time applying?
Okay, I have a lot about this. The thing about medical school applications is, if you think about it statistically and you think about it kind of from a perspective of math, a lot of it is just kind of random chance. It's whether or not you passed all the filters and someone looked at your application, and then eventually like you got selected and you jived with someone and then you got into the medical school. That's not saying that's not like, anyone, like it's for everyone, and that like, I don't want to like take away achievements from anyone else. But that being said, a lot of the times it's applying multiple times, your chances are going to get higher and higher. Because every time you look back on your application, you have things where you can like say, I want to improve on this part, or another part that you might find is a little bit weaker. So for me personally, it was, I was really research centric because I'm like a huge nerd. And so I spent all my time in the labs doing really cool research, but then I made my application kind of look a little bit more like geared towards like graduate school rather than medical school. And so I had to tell people that like can convince them that I can, that I'm nice and I'm kind and I'm caring and empathetic and not like a robot that pumps out data. So a lot of it is focusing back on clinical research, and then also doing volunteering. And then at least within San Diego, we have great opportunities through the UCSD Free Clinic, which you can volunteer if you're bilingual as like a translator, which is a great opportunity to meet patients and clinicians and also medical students. And then also things and events like that. So if you have to apply multiple times, just know that that's the norm, and that the statistics improve every time you improve or that you apply. So for example, statistically, I think from AAMC is that 50% of secondary applicants get in, which is much better than for primary applicants. And by secondary, I mean like applying twice. So just, don't give up. And I think that's the trait that we see the most amongst people in my class, is that a lot of them had to apply twice, and that they just never really gave up.
I echo everything that Jeff said. The thing that changed for me was that I hadn't graduated from UCI when I applied first. I applied between my third and fourth year. And to be honest, everyone told me not to apply that year. I just wanted to push it and see if I can do it. And it's, the second year I applied much more broadly. I applied to more programs. I know I also shadowed a physician because I didn't have a letter of recommendation from a physician on my application the first time. I don't know how much of a difference it actually made versus I applied the second time and all the chances that they accumulate the second time you apply. There's definitely this factor of chance, not because you're not competitive, but because there are more competitive people than the spots that are available for med schools throughout the country. So don't be disappointed by that, but also be prepared, because when I was applying the first time, like I said, everyone told me not to do it. And I was like, what do I have to lose? I'm going to apply. And if it doesn't work, I'm going to apply the second time. I was exhausted after first time of applying. it's exhausting, like emotionally exhausting, because you're going through all the secondary applications, telling them why you want to be a doctor over and over, because the prompts are different, so you can't copy paste for most of them. And after like 15 applications, I was like, do I even want to be a doctor? Like that's actually a very good question. Thank you. It can be very exhausting. So the second time when I was applying, I needed a lot of encouragement from outside sources to tell me that I can make it, that, it's going to be okay and stuff like that. So have your support systems, know that it's okay to apply the second or even third time. People do that all the time, and it's not your fault. It's the system's fault that there are more competitive people than the available spots. And yeah, try to keep the flame going. I'm sorry.
The next question that we have was, what experience or reflections helped you decide on pursuing medicine versus another healthcare related field? And was there a particular moment or what culmination of experience helped you realize that you wanted to be a physician?
I guess I could take this one too. I'm a really existential person. So a lot of times, like I've always wanted to go into medicine. And so, but like, that's kind of a boring answer. But really when I chose that, I kind of wanted to test everything else out. So I've done almost everything that I can that's tangentially related to health, that's tangentially related to whatever I want to do, and completely not related as well. So from everything like working, I really enjoy climbing and wanted to be a professional like route setter, working at a gym or going into kind of other stuff. A lot of it just kind of gets back into what is like most important for you about your career, and kind of like where do you find the most meaning in terms of your life. Notice how like that's not like medicine related at all, but I think that's like the biggest important part. It's like if you find a lot of meaning in working with people and making them heal, and then both emotionally, physically, medically, but also okay with the times where you can't do that. But it's really important that you be there with them and sharing those intimate moments with them. Then like, that's kind of something where medicine really only gives you that. But it's really kind of just trying everything. And then realizing that at the end of the day, it didn't feel like fulfilling unless I had that patient interaction. And I was lucky enough to do research during COVID and stuff, and talking with the families who are going through COVID. And it's really like difficult for them, because they were very we did a lot of ICU research. So, their patients at that time had no clue what's going on. That was like a really heavy moment. But in that time, I couldn't imagine myself doing anything else or being in anywhere else in the world. And so I think that kind of really cemented it. Granted, that's a very unique perspective, but I think if you're going through life and you're kind of going through all your experiences and being like, this isn't medicine, then that's kind of how I figured out that medicine was the right choice. So I think that's also a pretty valid approach.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit as well. So this is the classic question that you're going to be asked on interviews you're going to write about over and over when you apply to medicine. So we all have answers to this, but it's definitely like, it's a tough question to answer, especially when you don't know what you're really getting yourself into. And I'd like to also say that it's important to try various things out. So the application by default is going to make you like, to be a strong applicant, you will have to have proved that you have tried things. If you only do clinical things and no research, you're a less weak applicant than someone who's done both. And what's more common, and I know a couple of people already mentioned, if you do only research, it's also hard to prove that, why aren't you going to be a grad student? It sounds like you've done only research. And I mean, it is often easier to do than clinical, and it's also easier to do one or the other. So just wanted to take this time to mention, it's really important to have a little bit of both. It's okay if you're massively skewed. If you did one little research project and you were like, well, this is not for me, at least you prove that you've done one and that you know what you're missing out on. I think a lot of people, and myself included, become interested in medicine because they like biology, physiology, something that they're studying. And then the big question after that is, do you want to be a graduate student or do you want to be a medical student if you're going to go for higher education? And a lot of that comes down to personality, what you like to do every day. Are you someone that wants to look at a question, try to find the answer on a very detailed scale and spend years working on a single question, and that's grad school? Or are you someone who likes to look for patterns and answer many small questions? Someone comes in, oh, why do they have abdominal pain? And you're going to do more pattern recognition than like project building. So it's a kind of different model. And then of course there's experiences that push you in one direction or another. For me personally, it was being around underserved areas, people who had limited access to healthcare, and seeing how important they are in the community. And then also just realizing my personality. I like pattern recognition. I like solving, I like the feeling of solving a problem and then helping people out and working with your patients. And that's only something you can know by practicing a little bit. It's hard when you shadowing is one of the best things to do, but it's also really hard to find people to shadow, and you don't know if you're going to like it. It's hard to like something that you're not actually doing. So I really, again, want to emphasize that to be a strong medical school applicant, it's definitely best, and you don't have to, but it's best if you can prove that you've done a little bit, a month or two of one research or clinical, and then the other one as well. So that's just something really important, because you're going to get the feedback if you haven't done both about, well, how do you know you don't want to do this? Because it's just very common.
Another question that I'm sure will pop up a lot is, what advice would any of you have for students who are currently planning to take the MCAT?
I can start off this one. I took it, I guess, fairly recently, a couple years ago, and I would say the biggest thing is that it seems like a very large and daunting exam, but all of the content that's on the exam has been taught to you through your classes. So I would say in preparation for the exam, don't worry too much about the content review. Don't spend most of your time just reading a textbook or doing a passive form of learning like that. I would say it's much higher yield to just go at a question bank or just start doing full-length exams, because more than the content of the exam, for me, what was difficult was the timing, because you're expected to take in this huge volume of new information, and not necessarily information even that you learned before, because some of the passages I remember were kind of super random, and you're not expected to know art history and stuff like that, but you are expected to take the relevant information from that in, process it, and then apply that to a question in a very short amount of time. So I would say just do the AMC question banks, do the AMC practice exams, get your hands on as many practice exams as you can, because those are all super useful, and that's what helped me the most.
One side tip too, with the question banks and stuff like that, and I don't know if this is super kosher, but if you have a bunch of friends, there's a way where you can all practice together and save on the costs, and I'll let you kind of figure that out. But yeah, the MCAT is not it's not a test of material, but it's more of a test of endurance. Remember, you're not trying to make sure that every step in a marathon is perfect. You're trying to make it across the end. So just practice for that rather than trying to answer every question and know all the answers.
I think I'm kind of far away from MCAT, but something I wanted to mention, in case there are any attendees that their first language is not English, I completely gave up on CARS, because I thought that, well, it's not my language. I can't do any better than what I'm doing. I started by doing like a couple passages every night when I was preparing for the exam, and I saw that my percentage is not improving, so I completely gave up on it. And I was like, I'm gonna try to compensate with the other sections. Later on, I started teaching MCAT for one of the institutions for chemistry, and almost all of my students were English speaking, and I saw that they're not doing better than I was when I was first started, because it's not, I mean, it definitely helps if you're English speaker, but it's more of the technique. So I encourage you to keep doing it, do as many, like everyone said, do as many tests as you can, as many passages as you can for cars. And it's more of the method than the native language. So just something that I think was a little bit more specific, but I hope helps someone out there.
Yeah, I actually also want to talk about cars. That's for people who are not familiar with the MCAT, there's, and I hope this is still true, but 3 years ago or 4 years ago when I did it, there's 4 sections. There's psychology, biology, physics, chemistry, which is a section, and cars, which is critical thinking. It's kind of SAT on steroids, like the questions they give you a passage, ask you to read it. So it's like kind of testing reading comprehension, but it's really tricky. It was by far for me the hardest section, and I have no excuses. It's challenging. So a couple of recommendations, especially if you're someone who is farther away from the MCAT, so you're not in your crunch 3 months left. You can start doing cars in high school. Like this, there is no you don't need any classes for it. It's just a technique. You have to learn how to skim these passages quickly and get information out of that. So the sooner you can start practicing those, the better. I know I tried like way too early, taking a couple like MCAT, like question of the day back in first year of college. I couldn't answer them because I didn't know the science, but you can do those at any point. A couple tips about saving money, because MCAT is so expensive. All the practice, everything's expensive. Check your local library, not the school library, not college library, but check your local library. I know, and check all the ones in your area. I know when I was at Berkeley Library didn't have it, but San Francisco Library had an entire like 3 shelves of practice books that you could loan for a month. Those books are like $20, $30. They're expensive. So definitely try to save money that way. And then if you're, again, a little bit farther out from the exam, try to tutor. It really helps. Not necessarily MCAT, but any class that you did well, that's relevant to the MCAT, it's the best way to save money because you're being paid to remember things. So if you did well in OChem, see what you can do to be an OChem tutor, just so it stays fresh in your mind. Same, especially for biology. I think some of the more detailed information is hard to remember, but I think biology is super relevant. It's a great way to save money. And now I think you can do it online. There's a lot of opportunities. So that's my recommendation.
Yeah, I just want to make a plug. We have somebody who's a master MCAT teacher, and he writes content, and he did like 3.5 hours worth of breaking down the MCAT and also what to do as a first and second year. Things like cars and reading and practices you could start doing as a first year and second year. And then also the MCAT fee assistant program, which you would be surprised how many people do not apply for it.
The next question that we have is, are there any opportunities to work closely with the community at your school? And are there any student-led organizations that you're excited to be a part of?
I worked closely with the free clinic, with the student-run free clinic of UCSD. And I'm very excited that we have some of the volunteers who interpret for us and the attendees today. They do great work. So if you're bilingual, your help is always needed in the free clinic. I believe you can go to the free clinic website and like apply to be a volunteer. And that's kind of being, in direct contact with both med students, attending physicians, and the patients that we see at the clinic. There's a lot to say about free clinic. I will keep it short. But the other organization that I was very excited to be part of was the Green Peas program. This is a student-run organization that we invite some of the students from middle school and high schools in the local community. And we try to give them a chance to interact with med students, ask questions, and do some fun things. We had expanded their hunts. We have had like many fun things to do with them. And that was one of the organizations I really enjoyed being part of too.
Another question is, did starting community college late or taking a long time to transfer result in others discouraging you from being able to be accepted into medical school?
I want to just say that, well, I didn't take it really late or anything like that, but I want to say don't let anyone discourage you from like applying to medical school. People are going to say like, hold off and wait for it. It's not about like, if you want to be a doctor, it's about when you can. So it's like, at what point in life are you ready to be a doctor? And that's like the question that you should be asking. But, take your time. I think the median age for medical students has increased like since, when some of our professors are applying, they're like 20 when they're becoming like doctors. And then now it's like 25. Our median class age is 25. And our range is from anywhere from like, really young to like 19 years old, I think is one of the youngest in our class, to all the way up to like 35 to 38. So it's not about if you can be a doctor, it's about when. So don't let anyone like shut you down or say like you shouldn't be a doctor or like this is going to take too long. Really, if you want to do it, there's always resources available. There's ways where you can manage it, and I'm sure that many of the panelists here can tune in on this too.
I never felt like starting community college late or applying as an older applicant or even taking an extended time. I never felt like that was discouraging. I don't feel like there was anything in particular that held me back. I never received feedback. I didn't even receive questions why it took me so long on the interview sort of trail. I think I did talk about it at length because when you have a longer course to get here, you have more of a journey to explain, and you can develop your story, and it gives you a little bit of, you actually become kind of interesting to people. And so for me, part of when I started going to school, I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do. I just knew that I didn't want to be where I was for my whole life. And so I took my time. I started going to community college, and then I had a baby, and then I stopped. And then I started going again. I worked full time, and I would just go to one class, per semester, 1 or 2 classes at night. And until I developed and really started to know, with more certainty what I really wanted to do. I think by the time that I transferred to UCSD, I feel like UCSD was, in particular, and that's the only school I can talk about because it's the only school I applied to, but my experience and my anecdotal sort of experience with my classmates was that they were amenable to taking their community college students that were local, who were from San Diego. They were really friendly to those groups. And, it seemed like my classmates who didn't even have, the most, 4.0 GPAs were getting in, a lot more readily than those who were applying as first years. They had to have a 4.5 to get in, and all of the volunteer work and all of the extracurricular activities. I didn't have a lot of that stuff because I was raising kids. But I feel like UCSD at least was really friendly to the local community college students. In terms of getting into medical schools, my experience was a little bit limited because I applied I didn't apply very broadly at first, or I didn't apply very broadly at all because of just things that were going on in my life, and I didn't want to move my kids too far from where we were. My experience is limited there, but I did get 2 acceptances. I didn't have nobody gave me a hard time or even had questions about how long it took me to get through. Although, to be fair, I think I was the last one off the wait list at UCSD. I didn't get accepted till late or June 8th. So, if that's where you are in this journey, be patient there too. It happens. But never did it feel like a barrier for me.
Just want to add a quick thing. I feel like the points that Ashley made were great. Just, I heard a lot of discouragements, both when I was starting to apply for med school and recently when I was trying to apply for residency in psychiatry. So, by the time I was doing it for residency, I was used to it. I was like, yes. Those are the same things that I heard when I was applying to med school. I'm not saying don't listen to anyone. I'm saying try to pick the things that you can change versus the things that life gave you and you couldn't change. Like I couldn't change that I was in immigrant. I couldn't change that I had to go to community college. Those are the things that, you have it, and many other people have had the same conditions or similar conditions to you. Try to focus on the things that you can change and just know that many people have done it before you. Again, take into account the factor of chance and all those things. So don't blame it on yourself that everyone's doing it. Why can I not do it? But also know that there are always going to be people who encourage you. And there are always going to be people who, out of the goodness of their heart, try to show you the things that are not perfect in your application. Just try to focus on the things you can change and not change, and go with the things you can change.
Another question that has come up a few times is how did you go about gaining research experience during the community college years?
I can speak to this a little bit. So during the community college years themselves, it's really hard. I'd say it's also not expected. If you can get research, that's great. Usually that's when you transfer. That's when it's easy. When you transfer, there's a ton of professors doing research. Find someone you like in a class, ask them, about either their lab. There's just a lot of ways you can start working connections if you're curious and going to office hours. But when you're in community college itself, it is very hard. Some community colleges do have relationships with research centers. I was really fortunate that mine did, but it was really limited. And the way to get in is knowing the professor who's facilitating that. If you are in a community college like that and they do, there's a couple contacts with ecology research, which was my junior college had some Bodega Marine Lab contacts. That's great. The research doesn't have to be in medicine to count. It can be in anything. And I just want to emphasize not to stress about it in community college. If you can get it, that's amazing, but absolutely not required and not expected. And even most people who go to four-year colleges, they don't usually start research in their first or second year. That's usually more of a third or fourth year. So I really don't think you should stress about research in community college.
So one thing I want to add is that there's actually a lot of funding for getting community college students in labs. Mm-hmm. We've posted a bunch of them on our listserv and also on our social media. There are programs in the Bay Area, there's programs in LA. LA seems to have a lot, and San Diego has a couple as well. So we get a lot of them. I think I rarely check the email, but when I do, it's 5 things that are happening for either summer programs, which it's now a little bit late to apply for them, but and they pay you. And so if you are one of those people that you have to put a roof over your head and food in your stomach, a lot of, I think some of them pay $5,000-$6,000 for the summer, which comes down to around $16-$17 an hour. So yeah, and so we try to post those as much as we can that are just for community college students. But also what Alexander was saying is that you could look around and kind of broaden your horizon as well.
Yeah,
And I actually took advantage. Oh, go ahead, Alexandra.
I just want to say I've applied to some of those, and they're incredible. I just want to put a caveat there. You should definitely imply they're incredibly competitive, so not to get discouraged, because it's like applying to med school. There's a lot of students hoping for those. So I think they're an absolute incredible opportunity. If you can do them, I would definitely recommend applying, but not to get discouraged if you can't get in. And again, I think you should be absolutely fine as long as you find something to do with your summer. That it should be okay.
And I was going to say that I took advantage of an NSFRU program over the summer 1 year. And actually, so I started in one of the summers in community college, and then the PI asked me to come back. So I worked there for 3 years, and she paid me every year, even better than the NSFRU grant. Though those are really competitive, I think there's some value also in reaching out to colleges. So this was at University of San Diego, USD, which is a private school, which is a little bit less well known for their research than UCSD. And so in terms of broadening your spectrum and your horizons, even applying to colleges maybe who don't have such a research focus, just to get your foot in the door and get some research, sort of looking in unexpected places. I was working in a biophysics lab, and I was a biology student, and it was hard and I didn't understand, but they were welcoming, and a lot of people are, if you're interested in their project, they're interested in having you. And so sometimes putting out broad feelers, don't be afraid to send out emails. It's basically like cold calling, like telemarketing, and 95% of people won't respond, but all you need is one to respond. So feel free to, don't be afraid to do that either. Obviously be cordial and don't be overly aggressive, but cast a wide net.
I just wanted to bring up the point of email everyone. No one's going to reply to you, but a few people are. That actually for me happened in the at UCI. At IVC, I had like a minor research thing that honestly it's too far away. I can't remember how I got my hands on it. But one thing I want to emphasize, I am not a research person. I'm very much a practicing physician person. I'm like, give me the data, tell me how to practice. So research for me was not fun, was not easy. I had to do it because med schools want to see that you have tried it and you at least know how it works. Something I want to say is be realistic about what research is, because it's tempting to think of research as, oh, I'm going to publish like literatures every month. And it was very discouraging for me when I did heavy research at UCI for like, I don't know, 2 and something years, and not even enjoyed it and not published. That's not what is going to matter the most on your application. What's going to matter the most is what Alexandra said. They want to see that you have the experience and you understand the process of scientific research. If you get to have a paper, great, that's awesome. I'm so jealous of you, but no problem if you don't. It's totally fine.
The next question is
if you don't apply,
sorry.
if you don't apply, you have 100% chance of not getting it. Either apply or email, but if you do it, then your percentages increase. So, and what Alexandra said, don't get discouraged, because it can be discouraging, but you need to have a very, very thick skin.
Another question that we have maybe for more of the upper year students is, are there any factors that you have sort of become aware of since going into your clinical rotations that you wish you had known before about a medical career?
I volunteered at a hospital for 3 years before starting medical school. And I think that kind of helped me to, because, as a volunteer, I was the bottom of the bottom. And as a third year student, it's kind of the same feeling. Plus, you have to learn, plus you're evaluated constantly. The thing that I think served me the most during the third year was be very humble and ask questions, because when you ask questions, you show people that, oh, I'm here to learn. I don't know. I'm not arrogant or anything. I just don't know. And I want the opportunity to learn. So for me, that was one of the ways that I got comfortable with some of my toughest residents. Just ask for their knowledge, acknowledge that they are higher than you, and they have what you need, which is the knowledge in the field. And just, we all talk about smile. Sometimes it's very hard to keep it on your face, but just the interpersonal skills of trying to work with people, understand when you're told to do something. If you're unsure, definitely ask the question, definitely confirm again. And be as nice with the patients as possible. Most of the times the team started liking me when they saw that the patients like me. So those are the things I remember from third year.
I think something that surprised me, because even shadowing and even volunteering, I didn't see, and I think this is sort of a shift that's happened in the relatively recently. There are certain organizations in family medicine where doctors are doing a lot more sort of paperwork, fielding calls, fielding emails, now that the electronic medical record will dump right into their own personal email box. And so for me, I was surprised how much on the back end primary care physicians are really doing that isn't patient care. And I think you get a taste of that seeing it, but when you are sitting all day with somebody for weeks on end and they're going home and doing emails, and different organizations handle it differently. But I think that because this is a newish technology, it's still being fine-tuned, and there still are some organizations where people where patients email directly to their doctor and there is no filter. Everything goes right to the physician. There's some improvement to be made there, but that was surprising to me, on top of obviously all the paperwork that they're doing for disability and for insurance purposes and for referrals and
reimbursement.
Oh my gosh, on and on and on and on. That was something that was definitely surprising to me.
Consulting out authorization, insurance authorization. The only thing is I would add is like volunteering, any of that stuff, like make yourself an asset. I worked in an ER. I used to work in an ER that was in a predominantly Ukrainian, Russian speaking. And whenever I would have like a student that spoke the language, I would like grab them and like not let go of them because they were going to be an asset. The current hospital that I work now, we have a lot of Afghan refugees that come in, and I speak Farsi, which is close to Dari. And so I'm like, I get paid more, a little bit more because I speak multiple languages, but also people come and find me. So making yourself available, and what Ashley was saying, 18, 19, 20-year-olds are a lot faster on monitors and screens than 50-year-old doctors. So like medical scribing is a really big thing. But I also know this ENT doctor that is like wanting to pay somebody $20 an hour just to come and answer her emails and do some of her paperwork, and she can't find anyone. And so, just being able to put yourself out there and saying, hey, I'm really good with computers. I know how to, and she's like, I just need somebody who could use a scanner, and a bunch of stuff that most 18 and 19-year-olds can do in their sleep. sleepwalks backwards. So just making yourself available to help people, because although shadowing and all those things are very passive, if you can make yourself useful, then people want to have you around.
Another question is, what did you do during your gap years that you feel helped improve your chances of gaining an acceptance?
So I did take a gap year. I think there's no, like, what I did is not necessarily what you're going to do. I think there's a lot of things you can possibly do. Make sure you enjoy it. As a side note, it's an awesome year. I think you should look at your application and have other people look at your application. And before you start your gap year, think about what you're less strong on and try to focus on that. So if you have a lot of research, but you haven't spent much time in the hospital, see if you can get a scribing position. Vice versa, if you've done a lot in the hospital and you really hate research and don't have a very strong research background, see if you can do a little bit of research. I think it really depends. I did want to mention there's a lot of different things that can qualify for either medical or research. So it can be research in just about any field, doesn't matter. And then for medical, it can be volunteering in a hospital, but sometimes it's not even, it's a good thing to have. You should definitely do it at some point. But there's a lot of other medical things. I mean, writing emails for an ENT would be useful. You have a realistic expectation of what medicine's like. What I did is I also speak another language, and I was a home caregiver. I lived with an older lady who had dementia. She had diabetes, and I just knew her through my community. I knew that the family was desperately looking for someone to stay with her at night because they had help during the day. And that counts. I mean, it taught me a lot about information that, like, skills that I learned then I'm still using. How do you talk to someone when one day they're yelling at you because they think that you brought a guy home, and you have never did, and it was just the plumber? Like, various things happen that you have to learn. And I just want to encourage you that these experiences can be really broad as long as they were meaningful to you. So don't feel like you have to, because so-and-so, your friend who's a pre-med did this, you must do it too. There's a lot of different things you can do. Sometimes it's family stuff. It's really hard to shadow. It can be really hard to cold email. But if you have a grandma who has a primary care doctor, next time go there to visit and see if they'll let you shadow and see maybe they know contacts. So just don't be afraid to use whatever network you have, whatever the people around you, see what they need help with. There's a lot of medical needs out there. So think broadly.
Yeah, we did a workshop on how to gain clinical experience, and the people that do home health, hospice care, to me, like, are absolute angels, because literally, like, you're just sitting with somebody who's confused, and like, I know somebody who did that. They would just go in 4 hours so the caregiver could, like, take a bath and do, like, things, just personal things that people need to do. And for 4 hours, this person was, like, literally helping somebody to, who had dementia, I think dementia or Alzheimer's. So watch that video, because we have, like, a lot of things you can do. And there's a lot of things that you can get, like, short certification. And because, like, hospitals and clinical settings are, in America, healthcare is the most legalistic. It's the mostly legalized. Like, there's so much legal stuff that you could buy. It's just really hard if you're not certified. But there's things you could do, literally, like doulas. You could become a doula, I think, in like 30 hours. And if you are interested in OBGYN, then you're literally, like, learning a lot of things to help someone deliver a baby. So you're not doing, like, there's other people around you. They're not giving you the reins of delivering a baby after 40-hour training. But there's a lot of things that are out there. And now I think with COVID also, there's a lot more opportunities because there's massive shortages of and so I know, like, at my hospital, we're hiring people that don't have a lot of experience, and we're like, we'll just teach them, and so you just have to take a shot.
Yeah, like what Jobin was saying was you can get a phlebotomy certification in around, I think, 3 months, and then you can literally look for jobs immediately. And we always need phlebotomists, and they're very high in demand. And I think that is one of the biggest skills. And I can tell you, it's a skill that you'll use before you're even in medical school during orientation. It's terrifying, but yeah, it's really short, and then a really skilled phlebotomist is really amazing. Biggest things I want to say about, or I kind of want to underline all the experiences that you're doing. Katya was like talking about something that was really important, was that it's okay to not like something. And I think that tells a lot more about you than liking something, because everyone's going to go into research, they're going to talk about how amazing experience it was, blah, blah, blah. But if you go in and you're like, I hate it, you know, the interviewer is going to like become immediately interested and then kind of be like, why? And then you can spin a really cool story about that. I would say for gap years, or since I don't know whatever stage everyone's in there in the applications in this audience, but if you're, I would highly recommend everyone take a writing class. It's going to be a course that's going to be super helpful. If I personally don't like writing, but I've realized it's become one of the most important things, from when you're writing a patient like write up, from their HPIs, all the way to writing your personal narratives. You're going to be writing, like, you're going to be trying to sell yourself for your entire career, from medical school, convincing people to let you in, to residency, to convincing them why you're a good fit for their team, to your fellowships. You're always going to be writing about yourself. And if you go into research, you're always going to be writing about why your problem is more important than everyone else's problem. And then the biggest thing I would say is learn creative writing and narrative writing, because I find that people who are really, really good at that can get you really invested. And then, you know, they open a lot of doors in that aspect. So, and who knows, maybe you'll find a hobby that you'll really enjoy and you can write about.
Something that I just want to quickly chime in for is the non-clinical or non-medical related experiences, because your application does ask you about that. And for me, it was volunteering at the cultural institution that was local, that, you know, was specific to the Iranian population. But for a lot of other people, it's their churches or wherever that you're volunteering. I volunteered at like kindergarten, and I talked about that on my application. So a lot of things that seem completely unrelated, and you're like, well, everyone does that, but it wasn't really related to med school. But if it has to something to say about you and what you learned, maybe about, you know, leadership characteristics or anything else, those are also great things to do and put on your application and talk about them, because again, med schools are very focused now on making sure that they're not getting a nerd in, but someone who knows how to do life in other aspects too. So if you have a hobby, if you enjoy doing sports or anything, those are completely valid and valuable things to talk about on your application and spend time on. For my gap year, because we start applying, I believe in June or was it in August? So anyways, by the time I was finishing my 4th year in at UCI, I was almost done applying for med school. So technically my gap year, I had already applied. I traveled and I enjoyed it. And I'm so happy I was forced to take that gap year, because I really needed that time of doing nothing school related almost, and preparing for med school.
The next question is, what values in you matched the UCSD Med School's mission that helped you get into the school?
Okay, I would just like to say that I really dislike medical school admissions statements, because when you read all of them, they're all the same. Like, there's only 2 schools I read where their mission statement was significantly different than others, and it was just because they didn't follow the same format. We care about people, we care about education, research, and advancing medicine for everyone. I think we all here like to help people, And so ultimately at the end of the day, your story is really stereotypical, but that's not a bad thing. I would say kind of like instead of trying to match yourself to the school, advertise yourself as an interesting person with a bunch of experiences and stories. So like what Katrin was saying is like traveling is really big deal. And, you know, it is a vacation, it's really cool and fun, but you can write about those communities that you experienced and how that will help you advance your communication with patients. For me, like I like to travel to Mexico a lot, and then seeing how people in Mexico like live in Oaxaca that are like less frequently traveled can indicate kind of a lot of what these patients are drawing their backgrounds from, and allows you to communicate to them better. So it's more of selling yourself as I'm diversified, I've lived a life, I've experienced life, and I can write about it and sell myself rather than trying to fit yourself to the school. Because, you know, it'd be nice to go to like any kind of medical school. But the thing is, I feel like if medical school doesn't choose you, that's not saying that you're not adequate for that school. It's more likely that you're not a good fit at that school. And that's one of the things that going to UCSD kind of really opened my eyes to, because I have a lot of friends who are going to different medical schools, and every single one of their schools, when I look at their student experience and their life there, I'm like, wow, I would really hate my life there. That's not UCSD. And so I really realized that UCSD kind of like picks and chooses the right students to match them. And that's not necessarily saying like, you know, you're not a great fit for us, but that's just kind of more saying like, don't take it personally. And, you know, during the application process, it's hard to say that because it's so emotionally draining. But just keep applying. And then when that one school does pick you, because you only need that one, and UCSD was that, but like, they chose you for a reason. And it's not because that you align to their mission statement, but it's because that you are an interesting person that they really want there, and that you'll gel with their student body. And that's not something they're going to say in their mission statement, because their mission statement is, we want to help diverse communities, because every medical school wants to do that. So yeah.
Another question that's come up a couple of times, I guess, would be more for you, Ashley. It asked, how did you manage family life and raising children while being in med school as well as working?
Oof, that's a question. So I've been really lucky in that I've got to stay in San Diego, where I have family and a support system. It's not to say that it can't be done, but I've been lucky in that regard. So I was working, and once I decided to go to school full time, I did stop working. And I had a partner who had income, so I didn't have to live on just financial aid. So I was lucky there too. Not everybody has that luxury. But I would have struggled a lot more if I didn't have my mom in town, if I didn't have my partner in town, my sister in town. I used so many resources, and so many people helped me get to this point, and so many people I have to thank for being here. I was prepared to move, and I think I could have done it, but I think really, no matter where you end up, if you have kids and you're trying to do this, really plugging into your resources and knowing what is available to you is so important. UCSD has childcare that you can qualify for if you are limited income, which as a med student you usually are. And I think it is even free here or very highly subsidized. So the school initially told me, the School of Medicine initially told me that I didn't qualify as an independent person, that I had to use my parents' income. My parents are retired and I'm pushing 40, so I haven't had money from them in quite some time. But, so first year I went with the flow and was like, fine. The second year I was like, you guys realize I have kids, right? And so then at that point, they actually were able to go back and retroactively help me find grants and things for parents who are trying to get through school. So make sure that you're very, upfront and open about that with your financial aid department as early as possible, because you may be entitled to some help. Here they have help for childcare grants also. It was a little bit of a struggle for me because medical school isn't 8 to 5. I had plenty of rotations where I couldn't be, the normal hours for childcare is like 6 to 6. And if I had to come later or after that, like those types of childcare didn't work for me. And a lot of times the childcare that they were willing to help me with had to be, licensed childcare and a childcare center. So there were some difficulties there. But the dean here has been really helpful in helping me find financial resources there. So like really just reaching out, making a network. There is a group, I got onto Facebook here. There's a group of students who are at UCSD who have parents, and we get together as sort of a co-op, and we do sort of rotating carpools or rotating childcare. I have girls now that are 14, so they can actually help others with childcare. And so just really making that network, knowing your neighbors, learning your resources is so key. I'm trying to
14-year-old girls are prime babysitting machines.
100%, and they love a little income. It works out well. And I'm in student housing, so they can come have all the kids over, and all the moms can get a little bit of a break. So really tapping into those communities is key too.
The next question is, would any of you have any advice on the process of applying, and specifically any tips on writing secondaries?
That is a good question. I think everyone here on the panel can attest to secondaries week being horrible. But I think going into that, the best thing you can do is just plan, because a lot of the schools that you will get secondaries from don't really change their secondaries from year to year. So you can go into portals and see what their questions were in previous years and kind of pre-write them. One thing that I did was I applied to, I think, maybe around 40 schools. And what I did was I made a spreadsheet of the topics of the secondaries, and I kind of organized it that way. So if there were 2 schools that had kind of similar secondaries, I could kind of tweak the wording to fit each prompt better, but the meat of that essay would remain the same. So that kind of helped me cut down on some of that time. But those 2 weeks, because they say that after you get a secondary, you want to turn them around in 2 weeks. Usually that period of 2 weeks is just kind of brutal, and it's just something you have to get through, but there is a definite end in sight.
Yeah, similar, and just a couple things to add that I did. So most schools have a lot of overlapping questions. There's different word counts. It's a little frustrating. There's a few schools that have very different questions. And so just be aware that when you apply, I was taken by surprise. I remember Duke, very strange questions. In fact, I think I couldn't even finish the secondary in time. I think I gave up because their questions were bizarre. USC also had very strange questions, and UCSD, I almost gave up on because they said write an autobiography, and it was the longest word count ever. And I'm very grateful I didn't give up, but I was this close. But for the ones that are similar, I wrote everything in the same Word document. It ended up being 40 pages at the end. But the reason that was nice is I can just control find. And when I'd find a similar prompt or a story I already talked about, and then you just modify, I include that to my document. And there were a few times where I could just copy and paste. And sometimes the prompt was different, but I could just adjust the story or adjust the conclusion to make it work. So really recommend having all of those right in front of you to use, because there's only so many stories you can tell. A lot of times they end up being redundant, with the exception of those 3 schools. But even for UCSDs, I think I ended up just choosing my top 4 stories and finding a way to weave them together. So definitely would recommend including them all together and just try to save on time.
I did the exact same thing of having one Word document that ended up 40, 60 page something. I competitively, I have the worst memory of all time in the human being. So sometimes I even figured that I forget some of the stories that I have that I could put on a secondary. So that Word document really helped me to remember that, I had a good patient that I could talk about for this specific scenario or something. I don't think any of you are as bad as I am, but yeah, it was helpful to just know the top things that I could talk about a lot and use them in different prompts. Yeah, UCSD is longer because it's an autobiography and it is emphasizes that don't talk about the things you already talked about in your personal statement. And you're like, I tried to tell you the story of my life in my personal statement. I'm not sure I can tell you anything more about myself. But yeah, just have the things that you can really elaborate on and kind of tape them together.
Another question that has come up a few times is, did most of you finish your med school prerequisites at community college? And do you think there's any sort of undergrad prestige as far as medical school goes?
I know here with the community college that I went to, they didn't offer a lot of the upper div classes. So I had to do organic chemistry. I had to do upper level biologies at the four-year university. I know when I was a student, I was worried about that jump going from community college to the UC system and wondering how the academic rigor was going to change. I think that the upper div courses for me were a little harder, but they were doable. And I actually found that the labs, I thought, and that this might be my weird, I had, for anybody who's in San Diego, I had Professor LeBlanc, and she's so hard. The hardest lab I ever had was in community college. So making that leap to labs was actually just fine. As far as prestige goes, I can't, I guess that's it. I don't know if it's a San Diego thing, but we don't have a lot of upper div classes available at the community college level.
Yeah, and I could just add, and I see this in the questions, we asked every single dean of admission from a UC medical school. I have the UCSD one. They do not care if you take it at a community college. So I think this question comes up every single time at every single session that we have. And so we have our YouTube video, and we're actually making short videos answering this question, but we still get this. And so none of the California medical schools, also including Hopkins and Michigan State and Mayo, said the same thing. So we want to put this to rest. So if you're taking OChem at a community college, if it's offered, take it, transfer. A lot of them do recommend taking upper division courses like biochem and biochemistry, molecular stuff at the four-year school because it's not offered at a community college. So just want to put that out there. If you don't believe me, you could hear it from the dean's mouth.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, so I did all my electives at the community college. I feel like I actually probably learned them better because the classes were smaller than at Berkeley. I think learning at community college is great. The only time I've ever heard, just talking about the prestige, the only time I've ever heard it could potentially be a little questionable if it looks like you went to community, if for the people who take a class at community college, like they're trying to avoid their school. So over the summer, they're enrolled in a 4-year and then they take a community college course, like OChem at community college, because I think it might be easier, which my experience, community colleges classes are not easier. It's a bad strategy. But that used to be done, and that's where that stigma came from. And so that's where there was oh, you shouldn't do it. And if you're a fully enrolled community college student, absolutely take as many classes as you would like. There's a good chance you'll have better one-on-one attention. I would absolutely recommend doing it. And I think the only reason at one point there was concern about stigma because people a while back were trying to get out of 1 or 2 hard classes by taking it elsewhere. And I don't think that really happens anymore.
It's also an economic thing too. I think community college is $46 a unit. UC is close to 600. So I would say unless the medical school is willing to reimburse you for that, or somebody.
And, remember that the medical school is going to have multiple methods of knowing if you're competitive in the subjects that you are supposed to learn. They look at your grades, they look at your MCAT. So they're not just going to be oh, they took it at a community college, they must have not learned it. the other thing that I saw on the question trail, and was something that was my own question when I was transferring from community college to a fourth year university, was how much does it matter if the school that I'm transferring to is more prestigious or less prestigious? One of the representatives, you know how they come from the fourth year universities to the colleges and talk to you. One of the representatives that I talked to at the time told me that if you think you're going to have like support system in Irvine and you'd rather stay in Irvine, and you think that you're going to have a better GPA at Irvine, stay at Irvine. Don't go to more competitive schools, because at the end of the day, when they look at your application, they're going to look at, oh, she has a 3 point something from UCI. And if you're going to have a 3.2 from, I don't know, UCLA or somewhere else, they're not going to think that, oh, UCLA was more competitive, because they will have applicants from UCLA who have 3.8, 3.9. So if community college, for any reason, for financial reasons, for any other reasons, give you more peace of mind, just do it. I did all the courses that I could at community college, and I just had to do the ones that were not offered at my local community college at the UCI. So kind of, I wanted to answer the second question too, that I don't think the prestige of the school, at least I'm told that the prestige of the school doesn't matter.
The next question is, if you've had any struggles with imposter syndrome with your path and applying to med school, what's the thing that's helped you most to overcome your own self-made barriers?
You belong. I think that's like the biggest thing, is that you're here for a reason. You didn't fool anyone. No one made a mistake. You belong. Like as an undergrad, I definitely had imposter syndrome. Like first, my first blocks here definitely had imposter syndrome. It's a thing that happens throughout your entire career, because you go from, everyone talks about like, oh, I have like, it's so good at being like you're at the top of your class, and then you're transferring and now you're not at the top of your class. And I'm like, I'm at the bottom of my class all the time, and I never was at the top. And then now I'm like even further on the bottom of the class. But that doesn't matter. Like, like you belong. And that's like the biggest thing, is that you're always doing things for a reason. And that like, you can either look at it one way, which is like, using that as fuel, or you can use it in a way of and motivation, which I think is, personally, I don't think it's super healthy. But the other aspect of it is like, look back on your achievements, like coming from community college to medical school is a huge achievement. Every single step of the way is a huge achievement, and that you've like overcome different barriers in your life that no one else has ever experienced. And that's something to be proud of. And that you get to share this experience with others. And so I know like we drag about the application, but it's a really fun time to really talk about where you've come from, and to reflect back on your life, and then kind of go like, wow, I've been through a lot. And that was the first time I really looked at my life and said like, wow, I've been through a lot. And looking at those achievements and seeing those small achievements every day, with every class that you take, with every new material information that you look, that you gain, helps keep you going through that imposter syndrome. So just remember that you belong.
When that question was asked, we all smiled, because I want to say 99% of med students have that feeling. And I think talking to people in your class is really important, because you're going to find out you're not alone. Everyone is like, whoa, I don't, everyone's so smart here, I don't belong. But if everyone's feeling that, so just encourage you to talk to people. It's a really normal feeling. I mean, you're going to continue to, I still feel that way all the time. I think it's perfectly normal. You deserve to be, you were chosen to be here. You went through a huge process, and the people around you are just as like overwhelmed and nervous as you are.
I think third and fourth year lend themselves well to imposter syndrome because you're constantly in a location that's new to you. And you really are faking it. You're playing a role that's totally new to you. You're walking in this room and you're like, okay, I'm a doctor now. And it's a role and it's a play and you are doing something new and trying to sound confident when you're doing things that are totally new to you. And so, understanding, I think, like Alexandra said, everybody's doing this. I think that I've been fortunate too at UCSD. We have a lot of faculty and staff that understand how real that is for us and are really willing to share their experiences. And we have a lot of people who have, come from really difficult circumstances and, this faculty who are willing to share that like they failed step one, or, they didn't match their first time, or, they didn't match into their first specialty, choice. And they really struggled, with X, Y, and Z. And we have through our last couple of months here in fourth year, we've had a lot of opportunity to work, one-on-one with faculty who have shared, their experiences and understanding that it's seeing the attendings that are doing the things that we think are so amazing and we like hope to and strive to be someday, had these feelings too and struggled with the same things we are, and had that first intern year where they maybe made medical errors, or they, maybe said some really stupid things in front of their attending, and just really made themselves human to us, has been for me really like assuring and validating that even those people that we look up to, still struggle with this or went through a time of struggling with it too, and that we all, they made it. We're going to get there.
Very similar experiences. There were multiple times that I thought, I think they just recruited me because I added to their diversity. Maybe I really don't think I belong here. Third year really helped me in having bright moments and having good moments with the patients that kind of reassured me that, no, I really do belong to this field. So I kind of want to emphasize what Jeff said, that I think the only way to really battle with the imposter syndrome is not forget your achievements. So if you need to, write down when you have a good day, write it down and have like a notebook or something of all the good days, all the good things that you have been told about your achievements, about your good attitude or your perseverance or anything else. And it really helps when you look back at them. And, on your bad days, when you're thinking that I really don't think I can do this, I really don't think I belong here, or I'm smart enough, or this or that. That's the only way that objectively can show you that, no, you're good. Because if other people are telling you you're not good today, other people will told you you're good enough the other day. So just, I think it was a nice way for myself. Doesn't mean that I looked at the notebook and the day was rosy and shiny after that. It's hard. It's very hard, and it never leaves you alone. But at least it's, there's power in vulnerability, and there's power in sharing with others what you're feeling and knowing that they feel the same thing. For me, I found that people don't want to talk about the courses they failed. I failed courses in med school. And I'd like to talk about it to people because it made me feel powerful. It made me feel that, yeah, I failed it, so what? I retook it and I did better and I learned more, and, so find your people and write your memories.
The next question has to do with sort of transitioning from community college to a UC system to med school, and how you adapted your study skills accordingly to be able to handle all the content.
I think if you have good Skype, I don't know that necessarily they need adapting. Ideally, throughout the whole process, you're figuring out what works for you. And that's the purpose of all the classes they make at State. Med school is a lot of learning, but you're not going from no learning to a ton. Like it's a gradual transition. Every step of the way, it gets a little bit more intense. Like I think there's changes. When I went to Berkeley, the big class sizes and various things, like you have to be a little bit more independent, but it happens kind of gradually in a lot of ways. And so I don't think there's like a key answer. You're preparing yourself every day that you study for a class. And I think it's really important to find a strategy that works for you, and instead of constantly trying different things. I know some people get really overwhelmed, and there's just so much advice out there on how to study, and you should do this, you shouldn't do that. Find the thing that works for you and just slowly adapt it as you go along. I don't think I needed to dramatically study different when I was in med school. There were a couple little adaptations, like there was more material, and so I had less time to look over it, but also you didn't need to look over it as much because everyone was in the same boat. So I think it's just really important to find what works for you early on and just keep adapting it. I mean, things are going to change, but it's never a giant change.
I think I touched on this a little bit earlier. I was concerned about the rigor going from a community college to the UC system. And like Alexandra said, it wasn't shocking to the system. If you're doing well in community college coursework, you're going to do well in upper div classes and in UC classes. Sometimes I thought the grading was a little weird. Just it was new to really be on a real curve with, 500 other people. But I don't think it was ever unmanageable. There is definitely an aspect of you needing to go and seek out the professor if you are needing help, more so than just raising your hand in class, because sometimes it's not feasible, or really like, are you the person who raises their hand in class of 500 to stop a lecture or to slow a lecture? It's a judgment call, but office hours really pay off in the UC system, because your professor knows nobody at that point. And when you show up to office hours, they appreciate that you value their time, that they're there to help you out. Also, it's a great way to get letters of recommendation in the future is if you show up to office hours and your professor knows who you are and that you care, and then it's a really hard course, say it's OChem 2 and you're trying, that means a lot to them. It goes a long way. For me, there definitely was this transition into medicine school, the medicine work, where I did perfectly fine at the undergraduate level writing things, and that's how I remembered things. I heard them, I wrote them down, and then I reviewed notes, and I did just fine. I never had a problem with that. But when I got into medical school, there was just too much to write down. And so I really did this fine tuning of like, how do I manage all of this without writing every single thing? And at first I wasn't successful at it. I tried to write everything. I didn't have time to write everything. I didn't have time to review everything. And it goes back a little bit to understanding that you're not going to get to review things to the level of your comfort that you're used to at the undergraduate level. And you start to refine by the end of your second year. You start to see, you get a little bit of an eye for, oh, this is testable material. And this is probably a little bit more like the professor's pet research project. And so for me, I realized that I do still need to write things down. I looked for every shortcut possible because there was so much material. For me, there's just not a shortcut. That's not for everybody. Some people Anki, some people whatever, but for me, it's just the kinetics of it. That's how it goes in my brain. But you do start to fine tune, what are really testable topics. And it evolves slowly and you get there. But by the time you start medical school, you've been studying this long. So how you learn. Don't abandon that. Just, you'll fine tune it as you go.
I only have a few more questions open in the Q&A. One that has sort of come up another couple of times is, could any of you speak to what kind of extracurricular research or volunteer work you did while you were in community college?
I can start this one off. One of the things that I found that served me really well was an EMT course that I took at my community college. That EMT course was like evenings, I think an hour or two every week, but it went on for a couple months, but it was like easy for me to be able to fit that into my schedule. And then later on, I found that it opened up a lot of doors for me to be able to get clinical experience through EMT and actually like talk to patients, which is something that you don't really get to do otherwise in any other setting. Because when you're shadowing, you're watching an observation between or sorry, you're observing an interaction between a patient and a doctor, but you don't really get to speak to them. You don't really get to gather information, start to think about like symptoms clinically. So I thought EMT was huge in my pre-medical journey, and kind of served to like confirm medicine for me. So yeah, that's my thing.
The only medical related activity that I did in community college was starting to volunteer at a hospital. It was through a program that you had to apply to, and I'm not sure if they're still doing it. It was changed name a couple times, but I think it was Health Scholars Program. That was something that I started when I was in community college and continued through UCI. But other than that, everything else that I was doing was non-medical related. As I said, I was volunteering in the like local community center that we had for Iranians and things like that. I didn't do anything medical related.
As far as research go, I mean, we talked about my research. I did some biomedical research at USD. That was it. I didn't do any other projects. As far as volunteer work goes, I volunteered at UCSD off and on for a couple of years. I volunteered hospice. Hospice is great. They need volunteers. And I know that this was on hold for a minute with COVID, so it may change, but they need a certain amount of volunteer hours to build Medicare or some such business. So they're always looking for volunteers. I volunteered doing my kids stuff like Little League, you know, at the snack bar and reading to the kids at my kids' school who were doing a English as a second language program, you know, and finding things that really were important to my life and to my kids. I took random jobs here and there. I worked at the school. I did some work study stuff. Extracurriculars were weak for me because I was raising kids. So I didn't have any, you know, clubs, organizations. I didn't have it. Like that part was virtually empty in my application.
Your kids were your extracurricular activity.
That's right. And, you know, that subject comes up sometimes, you know, whether you should mention having kids on the interview trail. And I'm sure people have different opinions of that. It's kind of been a discussion of, does that strengthen your application? Does that bring something to the table that other people don't have? And if you're going to bring it in that regard, you know, that's one way to talk about it. If you feel like you don't have a situation where that really strengthens who you are, as a character and your story, it's not necessarily always something that you need to bring up. I know different individuals all have different opinions on that, but even in applying into residency, it's sort of something I've weighted strategically depending on who my interviewer is, you know, what I'm sharing with them in terms of my strengths and my story too.
I have a friend who was a single mom through med school residency, and she went for a faculty job or fellowship, but she talked about like being a single mom and all the different stuff, and the person that interviewed her was actually a man and was like, hey, me and my wife just have 2 kids and we're barely like making it. So like it showed that you have like true grit to do all this stuff. And it's like, we're like, his wife I think was a lawyer, and it's like we have like really good income and everything else, and these 2 kids are like really like draining us like emotionally, physically, and everything else. And I just don't. So this person was very impressed, and so I think, but she's like, but she also always said that like being a single mom of 2 kids, that's my identity. That's what I've done, and that's who she is. So
Very true. And not through the research or through, applying for residency, it's very much been the same way. Most people are very respectful that you have made it this far with kids. Especially, when I'm doing rotations and I can relate to other attendings who are a little bit older who have kids too, and they're like, wow, I couldn't have done medical school with kids. That's crazy. Especially when you show up every day on time and all of your work is good, and you're still pulling, you're still doing all of the things you need to do. People really respect that. And I know people don't like to talk finances on here, but I think it's important to know that the money that financial aid afforded here, even in San Diego, was enough for me to raise my kids on my income alone. I know it was a scary thing for me. It was a leap of faith, and it is for a lot of people, but the financial aid was enough. We weren't eating like kings, but it's enough. Way off topic, sorry.
I don't think that was off topic. I think the most important thing is to show who you are in those first 2 years. I think if you can get a little bit of hospital experience, that's great, because usually that's accessible. If you can get research, that's great. Not expected in those first couple of years before you transfer, but doing volunteer activities that you are passionate about and that show who you are and kind of contribute to your story. So if that is your kids, makes sense, and that's great. If that's your community, that's wonderful. I really love teaching, and I have always done a lot of tutoring, whether as a job or as a volunteer thing. I volunteer with kids tutoring who are underserved or traveling and teaching English as a second language, various things like that. Whatever you're passionate about, do a couple things and include that. And it just kind of, it frames you as an interesting person. I think that's the really important thing, is to show off your personality and what you love doing. Again, hopefully you love medicine, so you should be doing a hospital thing and you're interested in that. And that's usually pretty accessible, something clinical and maybe something research. But your other volunteer activities, it's important just to show your personality. So they can be really broad. And sometimes the more interesting, the better.
The next question was, how can you find mentors and make the most of your experiences in these kinds of opportunities to help navigate the multiple dimensions of the personal student applicant experience?
Oh, I can leave this one off. I think mentors kind of find you, or you kind of just like fall into them and you're like, oh, I guess you're my mentor now. At least like that for all my mentors, that's kind of how it worked. I think the way that you can make the most out of any experience is to be really brutally honest, and don't waste your time with any experience and trying to like make it fit or work. Ask yourself at the end of every day, like, what does this teach you about you that either you liked or you didn't like about medicine? Because that's going to be like all you're going to be writing about during your secondaries or answering during your interviews or just in general. And this can be from a clinical experience or from research or from like your hobbies and stuff. Like, for example, I enjoy climbing. So it's like, what is it that I find meaningful about climbing that compared to other things? That kind of insight would really help you extract the most out of every event. And if you're in an event and you really don't like it, why? Because that tells a lot about you. If you're like, this is not patient focusing enough, or if this research is too far removed from the clinical setting and I felt like it's not very helpful, that's very important. And in that case, it gives your mentors a lot more info about you and about ways to cater their kind of like advice that they can give you. And then also it makes you waste less time in situations. I can't tell you how long I've spent in like situations in labs where I just really hated it, but I needed to be there because of the hours. But then when I switched to a completely different lab, it was like amazing. And I had so much more fun and I got so much more out of that lab. So that as well. And then it's okay to just say no if you don't like an event or like an experience. Just saying like, I don't want to, I'm too busy to shadow. It's fine. and then move on to the next one. Because eventually when you do find that one mentor that like carries you really far, you don't actively seek them out, but when it happens, you know, you extract a lot of it from. So you try not to force it, but yeah, just be introspective about it.
So I've kind of had the opposite experience, and I wonder if maybe it's because I'm a little older that people don't feel like I need direction. But I feel like coming from a community college, I really didn't have a lot of direction. I didn't have anybody who could tell me what to do next. I actively had to seek out people. And so my first mentors, weren't related to medicine at all. My first mentors were my professors and the people who I went to say, hey, this is difficult for me. Or, I would just choose somebody who I felt like was giving me good advice, and I would go to them with questions, not overabundance of questions, but periodically check into office hours and go, hey, this has been my experience. Have you had this experience? Or, what are other people doing to be successful in this? And it creates this sort of informal mentorship experience where you have a little bit of guidance, and a lot of people really are willing to provide that for you. In medicine, I had a situation where I did a giant amount of work on this research project, and then there was a poster presented that didn't have my name on it, and I hadn't done a lot of research, so I was like, is this normal? Is this a thing I should be just fine with? And so I seeked out somebody who had helped me and been just really kind and sort of guiding in other regards. And I sat down at her desk and I was like, you got 5 minutes? I have this thing that happened, and I'm new here in the world of science and medicine. Is this what's the appropriate way to react? I don't want to make a big deal about it. And I feel like just coming to her with what I felt like was a difficult situation, she, could see that I was handling it maturely. She could see that I wasn't, trying to make waves. And she had this experience a million times in her life. Pathologists, often their stuff is cited without their names on it because it's just a picture or something, when really this is their finding and their diagnosis, or, whatever it is. And so, she provided me a lot of really good insight, and then I would come to her just every now and then with questions. But when it was time for me to start looking for, research in the field, when it was time to start looking for, other connections in the field, she was somebody that I went to. And I really had to forge those relationships on my own. And I was surprised kind of, because I did expect them to sort of fall into my lap, and they hadn't to that point. So, don't be afraid to just informally make somebody hey, you're going to be my mentor. You don't have to say that, but just if you come to them with a couple of questions every now and then, you're going to make a relationship. They're going to get comfortable with you. They're going to know you, and be able to help you plug into a network that's larger than your own too. So I think that's something that is, it takes a little bit of ambition, a little bit of gumption to just go grab a mentor.
Yeah, one of the things I would say though is that for all of us that are at the community college, I'm taking OChem with 10 people in the class, and your community college faculty have minimum master's degrees. So they know people that they went to school with that are in medicine. They're more likely than not either dating or are married to a physician. And they've also had former students that have gone through, if they've been around a long time. So if you spend a little bit of time, like my organic chemistry teacher, who I think Alexandra knows, I emailed them before the class started, said, hey, I work, can I get the syllabus early? And then I got to know him before even the class started. And then the first day of class is so what do you want to do and stuff? And I'm like, yeah, I'm interested in medicine. He goes, oh, my wife is an ER doctor if you want to go shadow her or anything. And I'm like, well, thank you very much. I already work in the ER, so I know a lot of ER doctors. And so, but anyways, but I got to he offered up his wife to be a mentor, because I was we just started talking, and it was I wasn't asking him anything brilliant or anything smart. We were just talking, and then he didn't know that I worked in the ER, but so he kind of just So if you're spending time with your like community college faculty, they know a lot of people. And actually, I found out about Alexandra. She sent an email, but somebody mentioned your name too that I knew at our school. I was like, oh yeah, I already know her. We've already been in contact or whatever. So yeah, so I mean, I think like knowing your faculty are like a great resource. Counselors are kind of hit and miss. There's a lot of good ones out there, but like your chemistry, your biology faculty, another person that I know who's a biology or microbiology teacher. Um, when he was when he was getting his PhD, his roommate was a medical student, and actually, like if it wasn't for him to save him to get his PhD, he was getting his. My professor was getting his PhD in biochemistry. His roommate was a medical student and was basically failing biochemistry, and but now I find out years later that roommate is now a dean of a medical school. I think he's like an associate dean or something. And it's like, oh yeah, I'll send him an email and he'll like do whatever you want him to do and everything. So it's just kind of like having those conversations, spending time with your like faculty to say, hey, this is what I've been like. If your faculty with like 10 or 12 people that don't know why you're there, why you're studying, like you're doing yourself that disservice. And it doesn't require extra time. And even like through Zoom, like I've had a calculus professor that I never met in person, but I've went to his Zoom office hours and we're like really good friends. And we're like, and so like a couple of weeks ago, we went out for a wine. I'm old enough to drink, so we went for a wine because we both like wine anyway. So, but I never met him, and I've known this guy for like a year. And so, um, use your faculty. I mean, I know that all of you have relationships with your people.
I was a TA for a professor, a chemistry professor at community college, and she sends people my way all the time. She does a panel once a year where she has her past students come in and talk about what they've been doing now. And as a TA, I had a group of about 5 students my last year who used to come to office, like my office hours all the time. And of those three of them are in medical school now and 2 are getting PhDs. So, they know a ton of people. They can put you into contact, especially the good ones who've been there a long time, who, like to make relationships with their students. They do have they should be making a large network. Also, a ton of exposure to mentors at the medical student level through pre-med organizations like this one. I know that at UCSD, we pair with the pre-med group and the undergrad campus and meet up and make formal mentor relationships at that level through 2 different groups, I think. So get involved in your pre-med organizations too. If for no other reason than to, just meet people who've done what you're trying to do and can maybe give you a second opinion.
The next question is, has anyone dealt with community college fatigue, the feeling of the community college experience taking longer than planned and seeing the goal of getting into med school further away? How did you stay motivated and driven?
I'm just gonna briefly touch on this. I think one of the hardest parts of being a community college student was staying focused and staying like kind of goal oriented. It gets easier when you go to a university, probably because of the community of people you're in, and just community college is a great place for giving everyone the opportunity to kind of come back to studying. At the same time, it's sometimes hard to stay motivated. I dealt with it, and I think the main way that I dealt with it was kind of reminding myself why I was doing this, where I wanted to go, and having kind of role models / people who have done it before me. And just looking ahead, keeping your eyes on the goal.
Yeah, it can definitely take a while. I remember In my community college, instead of 2 biology classes, we had to take 4. Instead of physics without calculus, we need to do physics with calculus. So they're just, we go through a lot of hurdles and we have to learn a lot. I think also finding good friends who kind of have similar goals. As we mentioned, it's really amazing at community college. You can meet so many people with so many different goals. But finding a friend or two that you can, are working towards grad school or working towards the same university you're trying to transfer to is really helpful. Not only because then you're going to have them when you transfer together, but they can really help you stay motivated because you're each going to have your low days. So like, when will this end? Like, what am I doing? You kind of encouraging each other and getting involved. I remember there were a lot of like student interest groups, and I found it really helpful to stay involved and talk to people just starting community college who are so excited and ready to do this. And I'm a little jaded because it's 3 years and I'm still not done. And that's true for med school too. Surrounding yourself with people who are excited and who can encourage you is really important.
For me, it's been all about the short game. I just look at what comes next because this road is so long. Trying to anticipate, I still have probably 7 years of training ahead of me, at least 6. So I really just look at like what comes next. Right now, I've got a rotation in family medicine that I've got to get through in the next month. And I think I have a presentation at the end of that I have to do. And that's where my focus is. And I try not to look too far ahead because it's so far. This journey is it's just one step in front of the other, just one step. And so what's my next step? I try to stay focused on that and not overwhelm myself with the long game.
Or just to add on, the other thing that can help me is try to enjoy every step along the way. I know that's cheesy, but it's just true. You're taking a physics class and physics was hard. It was not my thing. But that's the only time you're ever going to learn about that. And even if it's something that doesn't like naturally speak to you, try to find parts about that you enjoy. Just because, again, like I was just reminded because like kind of some of the short-term goals and celebrating the little things and made it through another test and oh God, I'm still alive.
Celebrate those little tests. Like I feel like every test that I did it well enough, I do like a little celebration, like one step closer.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would just say finding joy in everything that you do. If you wake up every day and you're like, oh, I'm doing this, it's like you're going to be a pretty miserable person. So like, don't do it. And I think it's a lot easier to say than not, but it's like, yes, great. And like, I have really bad days that I'm like going from working nights to days. And I always say, it's like, thank God I'm not digging a ditch or doing something that's like, or like in the hot sun laying asphalt um, or like being in the middle of a war zone or like any of that stuff. So I'm like, thank God I'm not in that situation because I could be in a part of my French, a lot more shitty situation that I'm in. And so finding joy and and what Alexandra said, like, yes, studying physics, is not the most enjoyable thing, but that's if you want to be a doctor, you're gonna have to do that physics class. And you have every choice to not do that. So if it hurts that much, because there's a lot of people that start pre-med and don't end up in medical school, and that's okay. They lead very joyful and wonderful lives, but they made the choice that this is not for them. So, but yeah, just like, and I think in the Marines they say, enjoying the suck, it's gonna suck. It's gonna be days that, and like I don't know about you guys, like I'm not in medical schools, but the last 2 years I've dealt with a lot of like deaths with COVID and everything. And to me, it's like studying a little bit of physics and like not passing a test, or it's very insignificant comparing to see somebody not breathe and die in front of you. So it puts it in a perspective. So, that's the way I look at it, but I don't like, or what Ashley's going to be doing in a couple of months in perspective is going through, cadavers and finding out the cause of death and writing those little notes on there. So,
I think one of the things, being a non-traditional student and having worked other jobs that you don't love, is just exactly what you've said, is that what drives me to medicine is that I love everything about pathology. There will be something I don't love, but today my experience is lovely and it excites me. And there are so many worse things that I could be doing. And I have worked so many jobs that I've hated. And right now I'm so close to getting to do something that is going to be at least 80%. I love what I'm doing, and they say all you need is 20% to fight sort of fatigue. So that, having experienced real sucky jobs is definitely a perspective and a drive.
but I think it's finding joy in what you do. Like Jeff says that he loves rock climbing. The idea of me hanging off a rock and trying to go from one thing to another sounds like, I don't know, torture. But he finds joy in that, and he could explain that, and that's what he likes to do and what he likes to experience. That doesn't mean that he's better than me or worse than me, that's just what you enjoy, and finding those things that you enjoy, and I think those are really, that's what makes us very unique. And I think a lot of people come to our panels and say, oh, what did you do? And I'm going to exactly do what you did. Because if me getting into medical school would require me to do rock climbing, I will either dislocate all my bones or I would die. So it's never gonna happen. So you're gonna have to find those things that bring you joy. I went for a research interview, and I put on my thing that I teach citizenship classes in Farsi and French, and the person that was interviewing me kind of arrogantly saying, well, what does that have to do? And I said, well, voting is power. So I'm empowering people to become citizens, and citizenship is about participation and being able to petition your government. So how you get funding into your schools, it's about voting. It's about being able to be counted, and it's being able to petition your government. It may have nothing to do with research and medicine, but and by the way, your lab that you're working comes through NIH funding. And if people are not voting for the right people to be in there, your lab and you won't have a job. So that's why we need to have more citizen and more educated citizens. So, and I think they liked it. I don't know. They didn't make any more snarky comments after that, but that kind of ticked me off too. But anyways. But yeah, just finding joys in things that you do. Do we have any more questions? I can't see. Trinity?
We have one more, and I think it might be a nice one to sort of wrap up if everyone could just go through and answer it. It's just asking, how do you envision your future as a doctor in your work environment?
Or what do you want to be when you grow up?
It's kind of fun because as a doctor, we get this question and we grow older and we still get the question, who do you want to be when you grow up? Because the road is so long. So when I grow up, I want to be a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I hope to work with families and kind of family clinics to work with both parents and the kids. Like Ashley said, you'll see that you will find joy in things that people avoid and people hate. I have a lot of classmates that don't like their psych rotation. I didn't like my surgery rotation. I really admire people who do surgery. And, the world needs all of us to kind of take care of little pieces of it and make it whole. So yeah, I want to be a child and adolescent psychiatrist when I grow up.
I think that as we go if we go higher class to lower class, it'll get a little bit more vague since the first years may not know exactly where they're going. But when I grow up, I would like to be a hematopathologist, I think. And so that is a person who looks at blood under the microscope and correlates the clinical picture that the clinician has given us with what we see under the microscope in bone marrow and peripheral blood smears, as well as using additional testing. So basically running a lab that can do flow cytometry and genetics and fish workup to be able to diagnose blood cancers with a team. I look forward very much to being able to do some research that guides clinicians ultimately to where they decide and can develop new treatments for blood cancers. And so, yeah, mainly working with the team and being able to use all of these modalities together to really advance basically treatments for blood cancers.
Those were two beautiful answers. You can tell that they already submitted their residency applications and they know exactly what to say. I think the answer to this really changes quite often, and I think that's really normal, especially like I still sometimes wonder, but what I'm hoping to do, what I love doing, and what I didn't think I would like going into third year, but absolutely love doing is well child visits. So I'm really hoping to be a pediatrician. I think it's really fun, again, to teach and focus on preventative healthcare. It's one of the few fields where you can really change a person's life starting really early on by just teaching them, here's what you do, here's what you don't do. It's recommended you try this. And it's such an eager, I've never had such eager students as a parent of a newborn who are like, what do I do? What do I do with this? Like, am I doing it all wrong? And just to tell them like they're growing, they're beautiful, you're doing a great job. I think that's just like one of the happiest jobs there is. And okay, well, they're not quite on the growth curve, but there are things we can do. Like, you're not a bad parent. We're working with you, and this happens. I think those conversations are just really amazing because you're shaping someone's life. So hoping to be a pediatrician and take care of mostly healthy kids and help them stay healthy.
Unfortunately, my answer is not as nearly as concrete as everyone else's. I came into medical school thinking for sure I wanted to do OBGYN. That changed to emergency medicine a couple months ago. Now I'm just liking everything. I'm not even sure between medicine and surgery if like which one is speaking more to me, but I'm hoping third year rotations will give me a little bit more clarity. And the other thing I'm doing is trying to get out and shadow as much as I can to get some exposure into the different fields. So yeah, when I grow up, I want to be a good doctor, but I don't know specifically what kind.
I always joke when I grow up, I want to be a chef, but no. In medicine, I think the ultimate goal would be something in internal medicine. And I don't know in what kind of context that was. I always have an interest in heart failure and dealing with really, really sick and complex patients. And I've literally seen some amazing physicians bring people back to life and turning, it looks like they literally turn back the time on someone's aging when they give them a transplant. And just seeing that kind of patient dynamic is really rewarding too, because just once they get that second chance, they want to take care of their heart so well. And then so they're like some of the most motivated patients I've ever seen, which is really fulfilling because you really feel like you're a part of a team with them. But some of the other aspects I was always found interesting was ICU. I love that, I love the adrenaline and the internal suffering. That is the anxiety, but it's super interesting for me. Yeah, just trying to keep an open mind and like what Asa was saying, trying to get as much shadowing and experience as possible.